Hi everybody, it's Casey from Upcycled Island, and welcome to part 6 of Upcycling Jeans. We've made 4 projects so far. We have very little scraps left, but we do have some scraps left, and I have enough scraps left on my jeans that we deconstructed in part 1. And so I don't want to waste it. So I'm going to patchwork some of it together to make a bag. My biggest piece is this big square piece, and this is the bottom of the leg. When we made the little fringe bag, we left quite a bit of that leg, this much. So that's our biggest piece. And then I have from the other projects, some other pieces, some wedge looking pieces and a straight piece. And so I'm going to piece all of this together to be about the same size as the bigger piece we have, so we can make another bag. Let me show you how I'm going to do it. Okay, I've got my larger piece here, and I'm just putting this on the table so we can see the size. And then I'm going to take the 2 bigger pieces, they're wedge pieces, and I'm going to place them on top. And all I'm doing that for is so when I piece it together, it'll be about the same size as my square that I have here. So I'm butting these 2 wedges together. And then I have a smaller wedge, and I'm going to put it where I have a blank wedge piece here. And then I have this straight piece, and I'm going to put it here. Now I have them all right sides up, and that's just for me to look and see that I'm going to be pretty close. I'm going to have seam allowances, so that's going to make it a little bit smaller. But I'm going to seam all this together. So I'm going to start with the 2 wedge pieces, and I'm just going to pin those together, pretty sides together. And I'm going to use pins because I want to make pretty small seams, probably 3/8 inch seams. And I'm not going to cut anything yet. I'm going to seam it together, and then I'm going to cut. Now, I'll put that back on top, and I have this wedge piece here. I'm going to put that right sides together, and I'm going to pin it. And once we get this all together, it is going to be smaller than our other piece. So when we get it all pressed and flat and ironed, then we will cut our, what is now our big piece. We will cut it to fit our newly constructed piece. And then I've got this one. I'm going to put it right sides together and pin. So I've got 4 seams that I'm going to make. I'm going to go do that, and I'll be back. We are back from the sewing machine, and we've sewed those 3 seams. We have 4 pieces, so we have 3 seams. The center seam, and then where we sewed in the straight piece, and then where we sewed in the other wedge. So this is what it looks like from the wrong side. This is what it looks like from the right side. We have this extra piece up here. I didn't trim anything because I want to wait until I have the other piece on top of it, and then we'll trim where we need to. I pressed the seams open as I want them to be as flat as possible. This is real important to press those seams. And then on the original piece, the bigger piece that we had left, it has a serge seam. And I have pressed it because I want it to lie as flat as possible, but it's going to be to one side. You can't press the serge seam open. So I've got that all pressed. Now, here's my original piece. And here is the new piece I just sewed together. And then I'm putting the big piece on top of that, and we almost made it. Almost made it. We have these corners that are coming over the sides here. We have an angle here and a straight corner here. So we just need to choose what we want to do. At the bottom here, we're fine. Do we want to have our purse angle in, or do we want to have our purse straight? If we want our purse straight, we're just going to trim off about, I think that's a quarter of an inch, quarter to a half an inch on each side of this big piece. And then we'll set it on top of the newly created piece and trim it to match. And that's what I'm going to do just for simplicity's sake. So let me trim off a ½ inch on each side. Actually, it's really not quite a ½ inch. So, actually, I guess a ¼ inch. We're going to start with that. So I'm just lining up a ruler, and I'm going to go ahead and use my rotary cutter. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm just cutting off a ¼ inch. Better to cut too little than too much. And let's see how that did. Here's our made piece. Here's our big piece. I'm going to set it on top. And I'm lining up the center seam on our newly sewn piece and the original piece. We're lining up that center seam. And it is pretty darn close. I'm going to pin that. And now we're just going to cut. I'm going to use my scissors because I know some of you don't have rotary cutters, so we'll do scissors this time. I use my rotary cutter to be faster the last time. So we've cut away that side. Side. We've got the top. And then the bottom So there we have it. There's our first piece, and there's our patchwork piece. So now we're going to unpin. I'm going to go ahead and use my serger to serge my edges. I'll be back. I'm back from the serger and the sewing machine because I did a few extra things that I didn't talk about earlier. This serge seam, I went ahead after I pressed it really well and I top stitched over that so it would lay flat. And I did the same thing on these seams that we made when we pieced this together. I did the same thing. I had pressed it open and then I top stitched on either side of the seam so these would lay flat. And then I serged around the sides and bottom edges. I didn't serge around the top. I'll do that later. Now we're ready to put it together. Pretty sides together. Match up your center seam. Pin your sides together. And then sew the sides and the bottom. And we'll be back. All right, we're back from sewing our bag together. I sewed the side seams and then I sewed the bottom seam. I went ahead after I did that and serged the top edge. Now remember, if you don't have a serger, you can zigzag that top edge or you can use fray check on it to eliminate the fray that would happen if it was just a raw edge. Same thing on the side and bottom seam. I am pressing the side seams open because I want them to lay nice and flat. And then we're going to square the bottom. Now when we made our tote in the other video, we didn't have a bottom seam. We had one long piece that we had folded over to make the bag, so there wasn't a bottom seam. So remember we made a chalk line so we'd have a pretend seam. But we have a seam on the bottom this time, and that'll help us line up so we can square off, make the square corners. So I put my fingers on the bottom seam and my thumb on the top, the side seam. And I want to line those seams up. So I want the bottom seam and the side seam to line up. And I test that. I put a pin in the side seam here, and it goes through and it comes out at the bottom seam. So I know I have them lined up properly. And then I'm going to pin that. I'm pinning to make that triangle. Straighten this out. And I'm putting 3 pins here so that triangle will stay in place and won't move on me. It won't slide or get out of whack. So I'm going to do that to the other corner. After I do that to the other corner, I want to line up that seam on a line or on a ruler and then measure, because I want a 2-inch depth on this bag, so I'm going to measure 1 inch from this, the small, not the point, but this indent, this V here, the bottom of the V. From that bottom of the V, I'm measuring 1 inch. I'm going to make a mark. It can be a pen, it can be chalk. It's on the inside, it's not going to show. And so I've marked all the way across. Then we're going to sew across that line, leave our needle down, turn, and sew back across that line. I'm going to sew across that line twice. We're going to do that to the other side. All right. We have sewed across the bottom to make our squared corner on the bottom of the bag. We did that on both sides. I also folded over 1 inch on the top. So that's going to be the top hem of the bag. And that's where we're going to attach the handles. And on this bag, something else I saved when I deconstructed the jeans was the hem. The hems off those jean legs. And I'm going to use these hems as the handles, as the straps on this bag. So let me turn it right side out. Square up my corners, push those out. So we have the nice corner. Your bag has depth now. It's not just a flat little bag. And we want the straps, we're going to have a double strap bag, so we want the straps to be like halfway between the center seam and the side seam. And that is just a little less than 6 inches, so about 3 inches. So I'm going to go 3 inches from the center seam, and that's where I want my strap to be. So remember, we put it under the fold over and then over, and then we clip it. Now, I don't have it pinned all the way around because I pressed this so well that it's going to stay in place and I don't have to worry about that. Then I'm going to take the other end of the strap and do the same thing, 3 inches, and that's where I want this one to go, under the hem, and then over the hem, and clip. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're just going to flip it over, make sure our center seams are lined up, and then we'll just use where we have placed this strap to place the next one. So I want it right there. I'm going to turn that flap up and insert it inside the hem, and then over the hem, and clip it. And do the same thing over here. This is all explained in detail in the longer video of this series, Upcycling Jeans Tote Bag. Okay, the last one, placing it under the hem and then over the hem and clipping. Now we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to do 2 lines of stitching. It's called top stitching. It helps to make the bag more attractive and stronger. Your hem and your strap will be secured by 2 lines of stitching. The first line of stitching we're going to do pretty close to the edge, and the second line about a 1/2 inch from the edge. You are done with your next project. This cute little mini tote bag. Full instructions are in this series tote bag, and it'll have the full instruction. This is the abbreviated version. I hope you enjoyed this project. I did it mainly to show you that waste not, want not. You keep all those little scraps because you can make something out of them. We kept those hems, we made handles out of it. We kept all those little scraps and we pieced them together to make a piece of fabric to match the bigger piece that we had. And we were able to get another bag out of it. It's a small little tote bag. So you have a small little bag to carry when you don't want to carry a big one. I hope you enjoyed this project. I hope you enjoyed this series. I'll see you next time. Stay safe.